In the short story Spunk, Zora Neale Hurston conveys the damaging effects of conforming to what society demands, specific to gender. In the story, a character named Joe attempts and fails to kill a man named Spunk, who is courting Joe's ex-lover. After killing Joe in self-defense, Spunk mysteriously dies and leaves the reader wondering, who is in the wrong? Let's get to know the author. Hurston was raised in Eatonville, surrounded by distinctively self-sufficient African Americans. Hurston's childhood was relatively happy until her mother died when Hurston was only 13, leaving her with only her distant father, who remarried quickly after. Her new stepmother was almost killed by Hurston in a fistfight, as her father soon lost interest in his children. Hurston's mother always encouraged her to persevere, so to finish high school, she lied that she was 16, not 26. Let's introduce our method of analysis. The psychoanalytical lens adopts reading methods that take into consideration the idea that literary texts provide insight into the author's subconscious desires, anxieties, and ambitions. The psychoanalytical lens is based in Freudian psychology. One aspect of Freudian's theories include the id, ego, and superego. The id represents a primitive human desire, like eating, sleeping, and sex. The superego can represent a moral conscience, and the ego becomes a mediator between the id and superego. It is somewhat a realist. A psychoanalytical lens poses questions in order to better interpret the story. Questions like, what are the ways in which repression structures or informs the story? How do characters' behavioral patterns relate to the psychoanalytical concepts? What are the psychological beings and motives of the author and reader? Are there words with hidden meaning? With this in mind, let's address the story. The story starts off when Spunk and Lena frolic into town and cause Joe, Lena's former husband, to feel jealous and dejected. His identity or self-image, also known as his ego, is not what he wants it to be. Joe doesn't want to look bad in front of his peers, so he accepts their challenge of masculinity. Joe follows Spunk and Lena into the forest with a razor blade, intending to kill Spunk, but instead, Spunk kills Joe. Following Joe's death, Spunk hallucinates a black bobcat and claims it was the reincarnation of Joe, who done snuck back from hell, Hurston 4. In this passage, Spunk's repressed guilt for killing Joe presents itself physically and symbolically in the form of this bobcat. It seems that the more he ignores his guilt, the more it comes back to bite him. Haha. Spunk expects his ego, when asked the question, was it purely an act of self-defense, to say yes. But when contrasted with reality, his ego is not so sure. Soon after his hallucination, Spunk falls onto a saw and dies. His last words proclaiming his belief that Joe pushed him to his death from beyond the grave. While this could be yet another hallucination, there's one more possibility. Joe's dad could have been the real pusher. Hurston might have implied this when Joe's father stands, triumphantly, Hurston 6, over Spunk's dead body. The hidden meaning in this word is just another way of looking at Spunk's death through the psychoanalytical lens. Spunk's repressed guilt may have led to his death, or it could be his moral judgment pushing him for killing Joe, ultimately determining him to be guilty. The emotional burden of death weighs down on Spunk, and his own superego presides over his trial, convicting him guilty. When both Spunk and Joe tried to solve their problems with violence, it got them killed. Is this really justice? Is this how society wants men to function? Spunk and Joe's demise seem to be the effect of gender roles pressuring men to be emotionless. In the end, Hurston hints that this cycle will continue when the community wonders who would be Lena's next. First and 6. Well, Lena wouldn't realistically find herself in another love triangle like that. The ominous ending invokes the idea that gender roles could be the real killer, and they certainly go both ways. A huge thanks to Fiona for making our artwork palatable, and here's our works cited.